Good morning. Welcome to the 2021 Legislative Roundup CLE event hosted by the University of New Mexico's Student Animal Legal Defense Fund and the New Mexico State Bar Animal Law Section. My name is Samantha Catalano, and I'm the president of the Student Animal Legal Defense Fund, a second-year law student with UNM and editor of the New Mexico Law Review. Some housekeeping items about today's event. First, the event will go until about 1 p.m. It will not have scheduled breaks, but feel free to take breaks as needed. You will receive information regarding how to obtain your CLE credits, which will be sent to the email that you registered to the event with. To ask questions of panelists during the event, please use the Q&A function located at the bottom of your screen. And please state which bill or which panelist your question applies to, and we will try to answer questions in between when panelists have a break. Without further ado, I would like to present to you our esteemed panelists today. Guy DeSherry is a lawyer, registered nurse, and co-founder of Wildlife Conservation Advocacy Southwest. He is currently the chair of the Animal Law section of the State Bar of New Mexico. He wrote 2 animal law articles for publication in the New Mexico Lawyer, Wildlife Killing Contests in New Mexico, and the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, Intentional versus Incidental. He has presented the Animal Law section Legislative Roundup in 2015, 2017, and 2019. He has represented patients and families in medical negligence litigation since 1988, with additional pro bono practice in the areas of foreclosure defense and immigration asylum law. He lives next to the Rio Grande in northern Valencia County with horses, goats, chickens, dogs, cats, and a very special human. Sue George is a senior attorney at the UNM School of Law and on the board of the Animal Law section. She is the director of Wild Friends program, an award-winning experiential civics and science department program at the law school, and just completed her 16th legislative session with Wild Friends. Senator Barbara McKenna is a field representative for the District 1 Congressional Office. She is a longtime volunteer with civic, environmental, and wildlife advocacy organizations. In November 2020, she was elected as state senator to represent District 9 and serves as the caucus chair. She serves on the Public and Healthcare and Indian, Rural, and Cultural Affairs committees. District 9 includes the communities of Algodones, Placitas, Town of Bernalillo, City of Rio Rancho, Corrales, and Albuquerque. Brenda is from Nambe Owinge and lives in Corrales with her husband and 3 rescue cats. She attended Syracuse University and Central Washington University. John Crenshaw is in his 8th year as president of the New Mexico Wildlife Federation Board of Directors and his 10th as a board member. A native-born New Mexican reared on cattle ranches, he has a lifetime appreciation for the outdoors and wildlife, both as hunter-angler and observer. He majored in journalism at New Mexico Highlands University and, after stints as a radio news and newspaper reporter, went to work in New Mexico state government. He started as associate editor of New Mexico Magazine, then transferred to the Department of Game and Fish, from which he retired after 24 years as an information officer and part-time game warden. Jessica Johnson is Chief Government Affairs Officer for Animal Protection New Mexico and is 501c4 arm Animal Protection Voters, and she leads their legislative and political efforts for the protection of all New Mexico's animals. She has a decade of experience in government relations on behalf of animal protection, including her previous work for the ASPCA in Washington, D.C. Jessica earned a JD from Lewis and Clark Law School in Portland, Oregon, where she specialized in environmental and animal law and received the Animal Law Leadership Award upon graduation. She lives in Santa Fe with her husband and daughter, 2 rescue dogs, and 7 pet chickens. Thank you for your attention, and I turn it over to Guy DeSherry.
Thank you very much, Samantha. And I'm going to share the screen now. We're going to get into this. So I'm going to share the PowerPoint. And then I'll move it up to right there. Okay. So I'm Guy DeSherry, and we're going to just jump right into this. This is our recap of the animal laws. This is our first ever virtual one. And so we're going to move right into the bills. Senate Memorial 1 was a task force to promote outdoor classroom. As you can see at the bottom of the page, it was a hotly contested bill with overwhelming support, actually. I'm going to turn it over to Sue George, who is, as you know from the introductions, has been with Wild Friends for a number of years now at the UNM Law School. So Sue, why don't you tell us about the task force?
Sure. Thank you, Guy. So, yes, Senate Memorial 1 was the result of work by the Wild Friends program. Wild Friends is, as Samantha said in the introduction, a civics and science education program at the law school. We work with students in grades 4 through 12 across the state of New Mexico. And every year, the students vote on a topic of conservation interest, learn about their topic, and then help write legislation related to their topic. That's sort of the first semester of the school year. And then second semester in a quote unquote normal year, we bust them all to Santa Fe in turquoise t-shirts, and they lobby for the legislation that they've helped to write. This year, of course, it was all virtual, which presented for everyone all kinds of challenges, but it worked. They still were able to meet with district legislators. They testified there were actually 2 committee hearings, one in Senate Rules and then the second one, and then the floor vote. So the House was not hearing memorials this year. So this was just a Senate memorial. The purpose of the legislation was to make some forward movement on the topic of outdoor classrooms, and it was successful. The students asked for a task force to take a look at what actions could be taken sooner rather than later to promote outdoor classrooms across New Mexico. And of course, that's a very timely topic with the pandemic, but outdoor classrooms can be used in the future and have been used in the past all across the country with great success. And we've already got a meeting in the works with the public education department secretary to talk about things that can happen this fall. So it's already on the move. The only other thing I will say is that the vote looks like it wasn't hotly contested, but the floor debate for Senate Memorial 1 went on for an hour and a half. So it was not guaranteed.
Wow.
But yes, it turned out really well, and we're super proud of the students for moving this important topic forward. Thank you.
So, Sue, what kind of issues were raised during the floor debate?
Let's see. There were issues about whether the student. One of them was that the agencies that were designated in the memorial, whether they were sufficiently broad enough to capture all of the entities that worked on natural resources. So we named the students named the Forestry Division of Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources because we had a task force member who was willing to serve on that, and because forestry has already some outdoor classroom in the works, but there were legislators that felt like it should have been that the oil and gas division should have been represented, and just sort of a confusion about what the purpose of the task force was. It was to bring together entities that had experience with outdoor learning rather than all the entities that had a natural resources base. So they felt like maybe the students weren't giving a broad enough exposure to all the natural resources throughout the state. Again, meaning oil and gas.
Okay. Senator McKenna, did this memorial come through any of your committees?
Hi, Guy. Good morning. No, it did not. But yes, it was, I guess, unexpectedly and expectedly, it had a lot of debate time on the floor. But I have to say that Senator Hemphill, especially as a freshman, she was just so ready, so prepared, and she was able to field all the questions that came her way.
And Jessica, was APNM involved in this in any way?
Hi, thank you, Guy. We weren't, although I did personally cheer everyone on from the sidelines. There was I sent some very enthusiastic tweets, so I hope I did my part.
Okay.
Thank you, Jessica.
And Samantha, are we getting any questions for Senate Memorial 1?
We do not have any questions at this time.
Great.
Okay,
And,
well, let's keep moving.
Guy,
John.
Yeah, for just a moment, we did get involved.
I'm sorry.
No, that's quite all right. But anyway, the Wildlife Federation, our education employee, head of our education section, testified in favor of it. And we may be engaged in this either directly or indirectly. We have Nature Niños as our Wildlife Federation program here in the state. It's getting quite a following. And the National Wildlife Federation has another one called ECHO, which is Early Childhood Health Outdoors. And it's got some great resources too for educators and families to build outdoor education spaces, and a lot of information on resources on how to do it and what to do and why it's important. So we're real proud, and thanks to Sue and to Senator Hemphill for bringing this up. This is a good deal.
Okay, well, thanks. And so we're gonna go ahead and move on. This is these two bills. I think they're kind of a provision, well, in Senate Bill 312 that really is very similar to almost the entire Senate Bill 419 as I was reading them. And so this was a pretty big changes to Game and Fish Department, renaming the department, amending the statutory policy of the department, adding definitions. And you can see the list there. I won't read them all. Everybody should be able to have this and see it. And then SB 419, I think, if I'm not mistaken, is more directed towards what's called the Jennings Law. And what's significant here, I think, is you have a big policy change. At the top of this slide, the 1711 is the current declaration of policy, and I've bolded some of the more key clauses in there. And then this was the proposed amendment at the bottom, was to really looking at things differently, bringing up the idea of a public trust resource, more of a wildlife focus, it seems. Then there's also a proposed change to what the commission would consider when it's establishing rules and regulations. And you can see again, they're looking at the existing one, 17-126 at the top, really talks about game animals, birds and fish, value, economic value, distribution and abundance. And here, the proposed language was something that's looking more like more of a wildlife orientation here. And let's see, let's go here. So I guess, John, I know you were involved in this one up to the eyeballs. So
Yeah.
you want to take us through this?
I'll give it a shot all the way to the top of my shiny head here.
Okay.
And actually, so Jessica's organization, APNM, and I think I had there was a total, I believe it was 29 NGO organizations who joined in on this. And I'm really proud of our executive director, Jesse Dubell, who pulled a lot of this together and really worked hard to get this support. And the cool thing about this is that with that broad coalition, we had a really good number of sportsmen, hunting and fishing kinds of organizations like Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Project, and a number, many others. And on the other side, and actually we were all on the same side on this one, groups like APNM, Defenders of Wildlife, Wild Earth Guardians, a Sierra Club, and many conservation voters of New Mexico was a big help, and many others. So it was really was very broad, and I'm really grateful for the support we got. I think this may have been a case of letting our reach exceed our grasp. The bill was 240 pages long. I believe 180 of those pages were devoted simply to the name change, which would have been renaming the Game and Fish Department to become the Department of Wildlife Conservation, and renaming the State Game Commission as State Wildlife Conservation Commission. The big policy changes here were the declaration of policy that you just mentioned, and it was up on the screen there. The Game and Fish Department probably doesn't get the credit it deserves for the amount of non-game and endangered species work that it does, but it does do quite a bit. This would have certainly expanded that mission. And way down at the bottom of the bill, there was $1 million appropriation to help fund it, which the Game Department hasn't gotten general fund appropriation since the 2009 legislature. So that would have been a big deal. And you did touch on some of the main things that we changed that language, or would have, to recognizing wildlife as having intrinsic value and intrinsic ecological value, and the language to go beyond providing for game and fish and for the public food supply, which are important things, and we retained those here, but expanded to provide for the conservation and management of the wildlife as a public trust resource. And I really love having that language in statute. And for the benefit, use, enjoyment, and food supply, we kept that in there because it is an important food supply for many New Mexicans. And it's really good, healthy kinds of, shall we say, non-GMO, non-pesticide, et cetera, kinds of foods. And also looking into preserving that and husbanding it for the future generations. And this is language straight out of the North American model of wildlife conservation, quote, regardless of wealth, privilege, or land ownership. So we had some equity issues or angles in that too. And then it would have broadened the commission's power to establish rules. And one of the, and probably the very biggest one, was the one that would have directed the commission to, when it was writing new rules and regulations, to, among other things, take species probable response to climate change into account, and give recognition to that future that is very much imminent. And it would have also expanded the commission's authority now that it has only for the Wildlife Conservation Act. The endangered, state endangered and threatened species are the ones under the Wildlife Conservation Act. And it would have given the commission the authority to name new and additional species as protected. And generally speaking, protected begins with protected from take by humans, but then there's a whole host of things that go along with that or under it as necessary. But typically the legislature keeps that authority to itself. They did cede some of it, and it was a good example and precedent for the Wildlife Conservation Act. The legislature back in 1974 and some subsequent amendments gave the commission authority to name threatened and endangered species, but gave a list of sideboards as to what they would have to be looking at. So when we were writing this law, and I believe Ms. Johnson contributed to this part too, was that we, well, I know she did. Thank you, Jessica. And trying to figure out what the guidelines might be. And they came out very favorable, as it turned out, to our more imperiled species. For one of the criteria would be that they would first look at, did this species that they're looking at qualify as a species of greatest conservation need, which is kind of what it sounds like. And the science-based reasons for protecting it, and then what might be required, rules and management programs, so that there would be some recognition of that. It created definitions for species of greatest conservation need, and that basically goes to the state's what's called the State Wildlife Action Plan, or SWAP, and it is a required document for the federal funding, which is the only, which is the biggest part, about $1 million a year to fund these non-game and endangered species programs for the state. So that was another good thing. And then the other things I think we'll probably get to mostly under the discussion of 419. There was what's called, we call it in brief, the 90-10 split. And that's how elk licenses in particular, but also deer and pronghorn and other big game are distributed through the draw. 90%, the residents in the draw license system, lottery system, residents of the state get 90%. Non-residents get a guaranteed 6%, which is a pretty small cut. And there's a set aside for outfitters and guides. And as it stands, they get the remaining percentage there, 16. And we would have gone for trying to get that into the public draw and split it again between the residents and the non-residents. And the outfitters set aside, it's open to non-residents and residents, and those people put in for that have to book ahead of time with an outfitter who's signed up for this program. Not all of them are in the state. And then if their name's drawn, well, they get to go. I think there's a good argument to be made, and in an audience full of lawyers, maybe somebody will take the bait and look it up. But handing over a public trust resource to private enterprise for monetary gain with no return compensation may be in violation of the what you call the anti-donation clause of the state constitution. But that really did draw a lot of opposition. The outfitters, as one might well imagine, really did not like it. And it was one of the main reasons that the bill got tabled and amended and then came back as the much larger, with that stripped from it, and the ancillary programs would have changed the elk licensing resident the non-resident fees to help pay for the increased number of residents that would be in at lesser prices. In other words, to make it a revenue neutral bill to the game department. I'm sorry, I wasn't real clear about that, but those sorts of things came out. And when the bill went back to Conservation Committee, the idea was to get it off the table, and then of course have the substitute bill adopted with those changes and amendments, and then go forward. It did not get reheard. So we came back trying to salvage what we could through Senate Bill 419. And I would also ask if Jessica Johnson wants to weigh in and have anything to say about this, because there was a very broad bunch in there.
Thanks, John. I think you covered it all really well. Actually, I'll just add that it was a good opportunity for a lot of different groups to work together on a lot of different pieces in one bill. And we'll certainly, you know, going forward, look at how we want to tackle all of those pieces in the future. But I won't take up more time on this bill because I know we have a lot of other bills to cover.
Okay. Senator McKenna, do you have anything? Did this come before any of your committees?
No, Guy, it went to conservation.
Okay. Okay, well, we're going to move on here. We're still kind of both in 312 and 419, I think. John, you want to, I don't know anybody knows more about this than you do.
Unmuted without having to be reminded. Thank you. Yeah, I worked on this, the core part of this bill for, I believe, my 6th year on this. The core of what we had hoped to do here would be to amend it's called the Jennings Law after Senator Tim Jennings, former Senator Tim Jennings, who was the sponsor. It passed in 1997. The number is 1727.2. And what this bill does, it ties the hands of the State Game Commission and the Game Department, and it opens the door, and that door has been kicked open by a small number, but significant number of landowners to really mow down and wound and kill with no kind of permission or retribution or accountability. Over the last number of years, several hundred, quite a few hundred big game animals, primarily elk, antelope, deer, bear, and the program here is, and the reason it came about is a longer story than probably anybody wants to hear, but what this bill aimed to do, and the only thing it aimed to do in this part of it, was to restore to the State Game Commission to set rules that would govern the taking of wildlife that is depredating on crops and property. And it doesn't have that now under the Jennings Act. And so people can and do shoot wildly, and 39 pronghorn antelope at one place in one incident, 64 mostly pregnant cow elk, and a series of incidents in another year. And more recently, 8 bull elk killed out of or shot out of a wheat field, and at least probably 5 to 6 of them got away and died elsewhere. The game warden got there and euthanized 3, but couldn't find the rest. And there's absolutely no accountability. And, you know, spraying shots, it's called flock shooting. If an actual regular licensed hunter did any of those things, especially that degree, they would probably end up in prison, but they would certainly end up with huge fines. And so we want that to stop. And the simple thing would be for the commission to have the authority under this act to do things like set bag limits. Say, yes, but you must get a permit first. You've got to justify this need. And sometimes there is a need. Sometimes things like hazing and you know, putting out deterrents, such as actually things like polar bear poop was one that I put out one time around somebody's house to deter elk off of the flower beds. But sometimes things just don't work. The field, the greenery is just too attractive, and lethal take does for a while. So that would have remained an option, but this other stuff would not have been. The antelope I mentioned were herded with ATVs into a fence corner and hit with shotguns, which really just wounded them. It was a bird shot, and you need big game rifles if you're going to do that sort of thing. And so, in other words, just put sideboards on it to try to bring that in. There were some real misrepresentations as to the effects that this bill would have had. We can go into them if you wish, but I'll stop there and see if there are questions and guidelines for me.
I don't have any questions at this time.
Okay. Or from the panel or comments. The other parts of the bill were ancillary to that, but in the wanton waste part, some years ago, when the Federation was active in getting this passed, the legislature did pass a bill that would require by law that hunters make every attempt to track and retrieve wounded game, which that probably would have been part of the new rules for under the Jennings Act, is you can't shoot and walk away. And that they were also required to move the meat from the field, as opposed to just, perhaps taking the antlers or the head or whatever of a big game animal and leaving the meat to waste. And for what reasons, I don't know, 3 species were left out of that. And that was bear, cougar, and javelina. And we wanted those to be added in there to be in keeping with the others. And I've never tried any of them myself. Javelina, I know from other people, is quite good. So is bear meat, and cougar is supposed to be pretty good too. But we want them to have that same respect, one might say, as the other big game species like deer and elk. And then the third portion of it was to try to bring more funding to the depredation response program of the Game and Fish Department. They spend about $1.5 million a year responding to nuisance animal complaints, and it's everything from ringtails and a lot of raccoons on up to elk and alfalfa fields and bears in beehives. But it's pretty expensive. And some years ago, again, the legislature decided to help fund that, and they passed a big game depredation stamp fee. That's $3 on each resident big game license and $10, I'm sorry, on every non-resident big game license, and it all goes into a pot. But the money's restricted to materials and supplies and can't be used for operations and administration. And the money it generates is greater than the law allows expenditures for. And right now they're sitting on a $2.6 million pot of money that they can't spend. And we wanted that money to be freed up to be used for basically personnel costs and operations. So there's that, and I'll stop there again.
Okay. And then, so I think you already referred to this little pathway of 312, where it went to Senate Conservation. There was a table. I guess there was going to be some proposed amendments, but it did not get removed from the table and stayed there. And
yeah,
this one,
the 312
John?
all the name change and all the other the broadened powers of the commission and all that stuff, everything except the things that related to the outfitter set aside and the elk license change, fee change. And when that did not get revived, we came back trying to salvage something, and that's what resulted in 419. And then it went to Senate. I'm obligated. It was headed about 3 different places and ended up in Senate Finance Committee. And the opposition there centered around this information that this would require a person to get a permit from the game department before they could address a coyote that was killing their chickens, and that was simply incorrect, and that it would mess up the interfere with the elk private land use system, which is the system under which private land elk licenses are issued. And I don't know that you want to get very deep into the weeds of me plus, but those were the things that drew a lot of opposition from the agricultural committee or community, and it died in Senate. It was tabled in Senate Finance.
Okay. Well, thank you, John. That is very helpful. That was a really good discussion for, very, very good. Thank you.
You're welcome. The arcana of wildlife law sometimes is just astounding, but thank you.
Hey, you should be the one to write the book about it. So we're going to move on now to SB 32, the Wildlife Conservation and Public Safety Act, also known as the trapping ban. This was, in case you've not been paying attention to anything in the world of animal law, this was to provide restrictions on the use of traps, snares, and poisons on public land. It was exceptions to this. There's penalties. It passed both chambers and was signed by the governor April 5th. We have one of the bill's co-sponsors, and we also have Jessica, whose organization has been behind this for a number of years. So a couple of things about the bill. It defines public land. So it provides a definition that includes lots of federal land. And some of the exceptions that I've put here, but as you can see, you're up to letter H is the last exception. So there's a lot of exceptions in that part. And well, there was a lot of issues raised about this bill, including the fact that I guess in 2020, the Game Commission had adopted some closures that involved areas along the Santa Fe Ski Basin Road, Taos Ski Valley, they list them here, the Sandia Ranger District, the eastern portion of Oregon Mountain Desert Peaks National Monument, and setbacks from half a mile from a designated trailhead. So there was this effort by the State Game Commission to put some limits on trapping. And that was one of the things that got raised during the whole debate. But I'd like to ask, I guess, Senator McKenna, if you could start us off on discussing SB 32 as one of the co-sponsors. You were obviously had to present and defend the bill, and along with Jessica as well. But if you'd tell us a little bit about this and your involvement in it.
Great. Thank you, Guy. Yeah, it's for those in the audience and on the panel, I was a citizen lobbyist with Guy and his wife, Liz, and APNM and a host of other stellar advocates since 2013 to work on getting snares, leg hole traps, and poisons off of our public lands. And so to be one of the co-sponsors in 2021, you can imagine how honored I am. But anyway, yes, so I was a co-sponsor along with Senator Gonzalez in the chamber. And boy, if something I've learned being a freshman, you really have to watch your bills, because immediately before I was going to present on the House floor, and it was in the evening, I had a colleague come up to me and say, would you consider this amendment? And that amendment was, how about allowing trapping snares and poisons on public lands that were directly adjacent to privately owned lands? And so you can imagine you're getting ready to prep, and then you get asked to consider this. And so I spoke with Senator Gonzalez. I spoke with APNM. I went and looked at the senator's map where he was proposing that this exception be made. And two things why we rejected that amendment and considered it unfriendly. Number one, The senator's proposed amendment did not say anything about the amount of land this would include. And then number two, and Guy was involved with this, when it's a public land, it's meant for public use. And so if anything, what he was proposing would have been against the law. So with that, we found that unfriendly. We did get it through the Senate floor that evening, 2316. You know what? Elections have consequences. That's kind of a it's a closer vote than I anticipated. And then going over to the House, actually, I'm going to pause there because I think Jessica may want to add something when it was in the maybe even in the judiciary and on the Senate floor. Jessica.
Sure. So, and maybe just to back up a little bit to just talk about what the bill does. So the bill applies to public land only, which, as Guy showed on the screen, was a specifically defined term. And to come up with that, we referenced Arizona's state law, which also has a ban on traps, snares, and poisons that applies only to public land. There are other states that have these prohibitions, but that they apply statewide in those states. So when we were looking at, you know, what specific lands do we want to have the prohibition apply to, we looked at that. But we didn't notice that Arizona had not included Fish and Wildlife Service lands in their definition. And when we looked at the land status of lands in New Mexico, we realized we really want to include that. And so you can see the SCONC acronym. For those that aren't familiar, that's the acronym that's short for the Senate Conservation Committee. And so that was an amendment that was put onto the bill in that committee, driven by the bill sponsors introducing that. When we got to the Senate Judiciary Committee, there was also a look at the exceptions. You know, there was a question about, one of the questions that came up in that committee specifically was about whether or not New Mexico had a right to restrict this activity on federally owned land. And so we did have to explain the reasoning for that. And then there was also a question about how that exception letter H around the religious practice for tribal members, how that would be administered. And so some concerns were brought up in that committee, and we worked with one of the senators to develop a friendly amendment that was then introduced on the Senate floor. Just to kind of state out a little bit more specifically how that would work, what state agencies would work together to implement that. And then I just want to point out that the prohibition applies to all traps, and that includes leg hold traps, body gripping traps, which you'll often hear be referred to as conibears, conibear traps, and it also applies to cage traps. And then the prohibition applies to snares and wildlife poisons. And those are all defined terms in the bill. So, you know, we kept it very granular and specific. There are misdemeanor penalties for each violation. And the law does not take effect until April 1st, 2022. So we have about a year to go. And during this next year, the Department of Game and Fish will likely want to adopt some rules that will help them administer and enforce parts of this law. And that means that we have one more legal trapping season to go before this law will go into effect. So, you know, we are feeling a little bit anxious about that. This trapping season has been the worst in recent years in terms of the numbers of reports from the public about bad experiences on public lands related to traps, snares, and poisons. It's hard to know exactly why. You know, maybe there's been growing awareness over these this past decade that Senator McKenna and we and others have been working on this legislation. So people know that they've heard about some group that they can email or contact when they've had this happen. There was also, I think, a lot of a feeling of, because of the pandemic this past year, going outside has been one of the safer things that people can do outside of their homes, and enjoying our public lands. And so perhaps there's been an increase in that, and that has led to an increase in the number of bad experiences on public lands. And these incidents, by the way, have taken place, out in the boonies, so to speak. It's not actually concentrated near urban areas at all. And there's also been 2 endangered Mexican wolves that have been trapped during the past 6 months in New Mexico. So, seeing that and anticipating that, as New Mexico continues to grow and our economy shifts, and hopefully gets stronger, outdoor recreation is one of those golden tickets for us with all of our amazing public land. And it feels really good that we're going to, as we step into that future, we're going to try to prevent some of the bad outcomes for people, for their companion animals, and for the wildlife that they want to see and enjoy. So yeah, so maybe that's a little bit there. And Senator McKenna, is there anything else that you wanted me to speak to at this point, or did you want to talk about the House side?
Yeah, just very shortly, I just thought of something, Jessica and Guy, and that was in judiciary. We did have a senator who wanted to ban all traps on all lands. And so we had to have that discussion of the many negotiations that advocates for SB 32, what they had to go through to ensure there was some give and take. Yes, there was, who wouldn't want a pure bill, right? But for something to work, we had to make necessary compromises. And so we think finally that Senator realized how many years it took to get SB 32 in the shape it was. But yeah, there were some legislators that wanted a pure bill and no trapping on any lands. And that would have been similar to Colorado, Washington, and California, I believe. But with that, we can go on to the House. Wow, that vote. I cannot remember a closer vote, 35-34. I do have to say, with as much of the many years of work of volunteer advocates, APNM, and many other NGOs, what was so important is to know that leadership had priority bills for this session. And guess what? SB 32 was one of them. So that is so important for passage of good legislation, that your leaders in both chambers and your governor believe in that legislation and are going to do their best to help it along. And talking about that close vote, I'll remind everybody, a tie vote is a dead bill, and we really came close to that. Jessica, would you like to add any other information to what I just said? It was just, I think many of us were just really overjoyed, but also taken aback at times.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary of the legislative session as a whole. I see the question on the screen at the bottom, was that House floor vote supposed to be that close? And I will say that I was predicting that we would probably win or lose it by a vote or two. So, and it was not the only bill that was that close on the House floor that passed. This bill was not alone. I saw that a question came in about the delay in the effective date on the bill. You know, why is that? Was that a compromise? And to answer that, I wouldn't call it a compromise per se, but we did take into account the fact that the Department of Game and Fish currently kind of regulates trapping and fur bearer species on an April 1st to March 31st annual cycle in terms of when their rules are in effect. So if this law went into effect earlier than that, they already have, you know, all of their materials set out for this upcoming year through March 31st of 2022, including the next trapping season. We did want to avoid, you know, there were enough obstacles in the way of this bill. I was really interested in avoiding adding more, and I didn't want one of them to be, you know, some comments about how it might be an extra administrative burden or an extra cost for them to have to update their rules and change things midstream. And I do think, you know, some extra time for the Game and Fish Department to, as Senate Bill 32 sets out, to consult with the Indian Affairs Department to create some rules and a permitting process for regulating trapping conducted by tribal members. You know, that should take some time, and there should be a lot of good thought put into that before everything kicks into gear. So that's the reason for the little bit of a delayed date. Otherwise, the normal effective date for bills passed in a legislative session is usually in July of that year.
Okay. Well, thank you both. And I know I'm gonna go to John now, because I know the Wildlife Federation has a different view of this bill, and I'd like to discuss some of the things, because some of the issues that were brought up in opposition to it, that this is the urban versus rural divide in the state. There was at the House floor debate, one of the representatives talked about trapping being at odds with the North American model of wildlife conservation. However, there's other people saying that this is not at odds with the North American model. So would you take us through the opposition to the bill?
You betcha. First, I'd like to congratulate Jessica and Senator McKenna and APNM and all their associated supporters. I've learned a lot watching as this first bill came out in 2013 to do this. And yes, we've consistently opposed all of them, but I really have to recognize a good job when I see it. The perseverance, there was some real adaptations to the language in the bill that the supporters made to get it through, and not having it go into effect in the middle of July. And I can guarantee you, as a former information officer and game warden, changing rules in the middle of the year leads to a lot of violations and a lot of hurt feelings. So that was the right thing to do. With that said, like we have opposed it, we think the trapping ban, the total ban like this, is overkill. We've also very much supported the idea that the State Game Commission is the proper body to do this. The legislature created it and gave it the task of setting an adequate and flexible system, and legislation is very inflexible. The rules that the commission created last January, a year ago January, and is now in effect, it made a real genuine effort to try to bridge what really is a very wide gap between the trapping and, to some degree, sportsman's community and the people who supported the ban. And yes, it is an urban-rural divide in my assessment, and in many others. When this first came up, I contacted back in 2012. I called the Arizona and Colorado Game and Fish departments and talked to their spokespeople. And what they said supports that divide theory. They were both referenda there. And in both cases, the ban was carried by Phoenix, Tucson, and Denver, Colorado Springs. The places where most of the trapping actually takes place was where the opposition to the ban came from, and vice versa. And New Mexico's demographic is very similar. A referendum here, I guarantee it would have, the ban would have passed, and it would have been Doña Ana and Santa Fe counties and Albuquerque Metro that would have carried it. And we believe that trapping is a sustainable use of wildlife resources. And the game department, and you got some of them up there, or did a minute ago, made a lot of effort to make trapping less unpalatable. And Ms. Johnson and I, and quite a number of other people, were on a trapping work group that the department created, late 2017 into 2018, and came up a lot of the things that are in this new regulation came out of those meetings. I do recall, and Jessica can certainly refresh my memory, but at table number 1, she and I and a representative from Defenders of Wildlife and Wild Earth Guardians and United Bowhunters of New Mexico were all on the same table. And when toward the end of the first meeting, the moderators asked, well, do you think it's worth proceeding? And our vote initially was no, that we're not going to ever come to an agreement here. And I think we were right the first time, and everybody decided, yes, let's give it a real shot. And I believe we did. And on the North American model, the answer to me is yes, it is. And the North American model of wildlife conservation is really a distillation of what wildlife management should look like. And it actually was only articulated maybe 25 years ago, but its principles have guided wildlife management in America for over a century. But one of the things it does is it would preclude commercialization of wildlife. And we did go to one of the co-authors of the North American model, Shane Mahoney's his name, and asked him about that. And he said, no, it doesn't. And what that commercialization clause is directed at is the mass commercialization that led to the extinction, for instance, of the passenger pigeon and the buffalo and any number of other species. And that this would fit the pattern. And I would also, during the debates, Garrett Venclausen brought up, he's from New Mexico Wild and used to be our executive director. And what he says carries a lot of weight with me. And he suggested during one of the committee hearings that we're being inconsistent when we say it's okay to monetize the pelts from these creatures and the other parts. I have a can of coyote urine that I use to keep away rock squirrels out from under the hoods of my cars. And so far it's worked. So it's non-lethal. And, but at the same time, Garrett was saying, you shouldn't be monetizing and complaining about monetizing like the outfitter set aside, which puts people to the head of the line if they have the money to get there. And the same thing with the landowner, big game landowner license distribution system. And I think the monetization, when we're talking about it, is a shorthand for those inequities as we see them. Lottery systems are equitable. Rich and poor come out alike. And I will leave it there.
Okay.
To your great joy.
I wasn't trying to express joy or anything. Anyway, I think let's look at our, okay, so let's move on here. I guess I should ask Samantha, are there any other questions on SB 32?
Yes, Guy, we do have a question. How is selling, auctioning
Okay.
trapped for, can you hear me?
Oh, yes.
Okay, sorry. How is selling, auctioning trapped for not the commercialization / monetization of wildlife?
Would anybody like to put some ideas out there?
I'll jump in
Okay.
and say it is. Yeah, Charles. I mean, Charles, I think it is. But you know, if it's helpful to kind of parse out the arguments and summarize what I've heard from the other side, is that it's only bad commercialization that we should stop, depending on the species, if the species can be destroyed by that commercialization. So what we have heard is that, well, because coyotes, for example, are so good at reproducing, especially when they're under stress, when their populations are being removed or killed, then it's no problem, because coyotes aren't going to be decimated like the passenger pigeon, like Mr. Crenshaw said. You know, from my side of the fence, I would rather see some clearer consistency, that if it's not okay to hunt elk and sell the meat, then it shouldn't be okay to hunt bobcats to sell the fur. But that's kind of where the split lies, I think.
John?
Yeah, I'm not sure how much we want to
Yeah.
go through this, but again, I tend to think that the monetization that we talk about in regards to elk and antelope and so on does go to, in large degree, that equity issue. And in New Mexico, and this is not true nationwide, actually selling the fur bearer pelts is also consistent with current New Mexico laws that does allow the sale, not of meat, but the skins and antlers and horns and other body parts like claws and in some cases teeth and of big game animals and birds, resident game birds, not migratory game birds, but say pheasant or quail feathers to people who want a feather in their hat, or tie flies to fish with, for instance. And again, I'd go back. There's a lot beyond pelts that come out of fur bearers, and there's coyote urine is just one, bobcat urine is another. But no, there is some consistency there, and some inconsistencies too, probably.
All right. Well, we're going to move on to the wild horse management. And Senator McKenna, you sponsored this bill. You were a co-sponsor. And would you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. Thank you, Guy. So this bill came out of well, I should say that Senator Woods has been working on this legislation for years. I learned about the issue from one of my constituents in Placitas, whereby she and her husband have been taking care of probably 16, 17 of these horses because simply they need care, they need water, and they need to be fed. It's my understanding back in about 2007, 2008, there was an influx of a bunch of horses coming into the Placitas Sandoval area. The speculation is because we were going through such a financial hardship nationwide, probably worldwide, folks were dumping their horses because they could no longer care for them. Well, they have reproduced, and they're simply, number one, the creek bed that used to run very well for years, that has really changed. It's quite dry right now, and that's why supplemental water is needed for those who have chosen to support the horses, their welfare. And then also those that aren't being taken care of, they are going into folks' yards and doing what anybody does, right? We all get hungry. And so when there are particularly good plants that people have planted in their yards, they're getting eaten. There was some talk in the past years, well, why don't you fence your yards? Well, in Placitas, like in many other places, there are covenants. And so fencing is not allowed in many of these subdivisions. I think something else that really drove me to work with Senator Woods and APNM to address this is there was an accident. One of these wild horses was on the highway, and a motorcyclist hit it quite by accident. Unfortunately, that horse had to be euthanized. Fortunately, the motorcyclist was able to walk away. So that was another reason why I said, boy, we really need to address this. Now, unfortunately, because the bill did not progress the way we wanted to, we get to worry about more costs that are going to be falling to the folks who want to care for them. There's going to be more costs for birth control. Sandoval County has been doing some birth control practices with the mayors there. And we got to worry about more possible accidents on highway. Now, I do need to say as well that Guy and Jessica know this well, and probably everybody on this call. Placitas isn't the only area in New Mexico where we have a conflict, and are many of us wanting to ensure the welfare of these horses, but then being very concerned when there are accidents and conflicts with humans. And I think I remember such a really bad accident up in the northwest corner of our state. What we did learn in one of the committees is that the New Mexico Livestock Board still has some issues with the prepared language. So we're going to use this opportunity to talk with them and see what we can do to further develop the language of the bills so they can be completely on board with it. Right now, there are certain restrictions in the current statute that really tie the hands of those of us who would like to see the horses perhaps adopted to either private owners or eventually what would be really ideal in my mind and in Senator Wood's mind is a horse sanctuary where they have plenty of land and their welfare is ensured. And we can invite the public so they can learn about the equines in New Mexico. With that, I'm going to turn the mic over to Jessica, and she can add some more information about this bill. Thank you.
Yeah, and one of the things, Jessica, I noticed that this also included, was an effort to include the wild horses into the cruelty prohibition statutes.
That's right. Yes, and that comes out of a series of rulings from the New Mexico Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals. I don't know, is it helpful for me to talk about that?
Yeah, let me see where our time is. We've got about 20 minutes left, and we got a few bills to go through, but go ahead and give some background because I know there's some case law back there.
Yeah, well, so just to oversimplify it, there is an older case, the Cleve case, where the Supreme Court looked at whether our cruelty statute applied to wild animals. I think in that case it was deer, or some native ungulate. Our cruelty statute at the time, talked about animal cruelty, but it had no definition for animals. And so the court was forced to, just look at apply some statutory construction rules, and based on, mostly the general versus specific rule, decided that, there's all of these specific laws that apply to wildlife in the wild in Chapter 17, the game and fish statutes, that is what must apply to wildlife like deer. They must not be covered under this general animal cruelty law. I could argue that to death if I had the time, but I won't. Shortly after that, I think the legislation was pending during that case. The cruelty statute was amended to include a definition for animals. However, the definition for animals is constructed such that it simply says what is not included. So I think the definition as it reads is animals does not include, I think it's reptiles. It might just be reptiles, or it doesn't apply to wild reptiles or something like that. But so it doesn't, the definition doesn't explicitly say what animals are, it just says what's excluded. And that should still be fine. Based on, the rules that our legislative staff follow when they're drafting bills, that definition should still not automatically exclude any animals that aren't specifically referenced in that definition, because the includes or does not include is not treated as an exclusionary phrase in our statutes. However, even though that change has been made in the statute since Cleve, as courts have looked at this question again, they keep referencing Cleve. So Cleve right now is still treated as the law of the land, such that wild animals in the wild, not in captivity, are deemed not covered by our cruelty statute according to our courts. And so, with this Senate bill, looking at kind of overhauling how we are managing wild horses, and knowing that there is a lot of very contentious feelings and activity around these wild horses in certain communities, we wanted to make sure that no matter what, no one's going to be allowed to take measures into their own hands and kill or slaughter these horses. So that's why that piece was included in this bill as part of this sort of overall protection package.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, this next slide is some of the new material from the bill, and the things that it kind of addresses. Some of the things we've already discussed. So it was in Senate Judiciary at the close of the session with a committee substitute, it looks like.
That's right. It was one of many bills that got sort of stuck in that
Senate
committee.
Judiciary. Yes.
And the language in the bill developed as we were going in the session. This has been a work in progress over many, many years, and we're just continuing to try to fine tune things. So there was a committee substitute in the works, didn't get it introduced, and the bill died. Okay.
The Horse Shelter Rescue Fund, this was a proposed $20,000 appropriation to the Horse Rescue Fund from the general fund. Looks like you made it through and the SIRC committee, and then you're at Senate Finance at the close. Is that kind of an unusual thing to try and get an appropriation from the general fund for this?
Yeah, thank you, Guy. And I want to just step back a little bit. A reason why I proposed SB 407. I wanted to work hand in hand with with the Wild Horse Management Fund. And then also we as legislators, we got junior bills. And so once my junior bill, once I had exceeded that amount, I said, well, I really want to ensure that if these horses are taken to the livestock board shelter for horses, that there's some money to take care of them. And so that's the rationale for SB 407. Yes, unfortunately, we didn't make it to Finance Committee. Like the Judiciary Committee, they really got inundated and bills just were not moving. So this is something that I will work on again, because once we do eventually get a wild horse management bill that passes, we want to make sure that the preserve, or those that are taking care of them until the horses are adopted or what have you, that there is adequate funding for their care and welfare.
So moving on, we got, do we have any questions coming in?
Yes, we do. We have two questions
Okay.
right now. Jessica
Okay.
also, she would like to address those.
Sure. So Peter is asking, is this related to the checkoff on the New Mexico income tax refunds? So yes, so the Horse Shelter Rescue Fund was created several years ago. And when it was created, it came with a $250,000 appropriation from the general fund. And that's the only general fund money it's gotten since then. But the fund exists. It started with that sort of seed money, and it's administered by the livestock board. The livestock board then distributes that money to the state licensed horse shelters who take in homeless and abused horses. The other ways that this fund can accept money is direct donations, of course. So you can go to the livestock board website if you're interested in donating to help the care of shelter horses. But also there is an income tax checkoff option. So on the Pit D form, when you're filing your taxes, and there's that list of funds where you can donate your return towards. The Horse Shelter Rescue Fund is one of those options. So there's, I want to say, maybe on average about 10 grand a year, a little bit more, that comes in through those avenues, which certainly helps, but horses are very expensive to care for and to feed. If anyone looks at hay prices, you know what I'm talking about. So we need more funding, and the pandemic really hit the shelters hard as far as intakes, the lack of volunteers being able to come to their facilities to help. So that's why we were really pushing for money for all sheltered horses, including, as Senator McKenna mentioned, any horses that might be taken up if they're wild horses and they need to be removed from their current location to a safe place. But as the senator also said, there was this what's often called a junior budget, where there's some additional revenue that individual legislators get to allocate towards state agency projects or initiatives. And through that process, we were able to raise $150,000 for the Horse Shelter Rescue Fund this year. And you know, having an appropriation bill like Senator McKenna introduced kind of helps with that momentum. So thank you, Senator, for that. And we did succeed in raising some support for the horse shelters this year. And then the other question, what do you think needs to change to move the horse-related bills forward? I mean, I think one of the changes which has kind of happened is Senator McKenna has stepped into the arena. She's right there where some of these wild horses are. So she's in the community, and you know, I think can bring some really great leadership to this issue. I think we're getting really close to being able to pass it. It's a difficult issue because you kind of it's contentious because you have some people that don't think wild horses should exist, and then you have some other people on the other extreme that think that the wild horses should be completely unmanaged and we should just leave them alone, and there should be no circumstances where we remove them from the landscape and put them in adoptive homes or sanctuaries, you know, for their own safety and for public safety. And what we've been working on is that middle road of like, how do we make sure that the horses are cared for, that there are absolutely no inhumane outcomes, but we're also being responsive to the fact that there are public safety concerns, there's horse welfare concerns, we're dealing with climate change and drought, and that's only going to make things worse as things go forward. So I think we're getting close and we just need to stick with it. And thank you, Senator McKenna, for joining the fray.
Okay, so we're really, as we see where we're at. We got about 9 more minutes left. I'll get to this. This bill was to restrict the use of neonicotinoid pesticides. I guess some background on these comes from the FIR. This is these are some of the impacts of these types of insecticides and how they work. This bill, I think, let me see, whoop, back here. Well, I think it made it through one. Oh, I know what's happening. This is in my way here. Yes, it made it to the Senate floor and failed on an 18-20 vote. So I suspect we'll see that one again. The Soil and Water Conservation Districts bill. This was a bill that was directed towards, for example, Whitfield Wildlife Conservation Area in Valencia County does a good bit of it. It's an outdoor classroom in addition to other things. And this was a bill directed to limit mill levies for 10 years. Right now, if a soil and water conservation district goes beyond, or if they get indebtedness, what happens is their mill levy continues even if it was set to expire. So this was an effort to try and limit that flexibility on the parts of the soil and water conservation districts, and it was tabled in its first committee. But it has to do more with habitat, wildlife habitat, outdoor classrooms, things like that. And do we have any more questions out there? I don't see any on my screen.
I think we have answered all of them.
Okay. There's a bill for confinement of egg-laying hens, defines cage-free housing system. It was due pass in Senate Conservation, but was, among other bills, was on the SJC calendar at the close of the session. The environmental database, this is a pretty comprehensive bill here. Mapping of transmission facilities, federal regulations to disclose energy infrastructure. It ran into a lot of issues because some of the information is not intended to ever be made public, except because of national security concerns, I guess. But this one, let's see. I know let me see if this is here. Nope. But it didn't, I don't think it made it out of committee. And then the fundamental right to hunt and fish, that came up again in a couple of proposals.
I'm sorry, Guy, sorry, were you just referring to House Bill 51, the Environmental Database
The
Act?
database.
Yeah, it passed. It passed.
Oh, it
And
passed.
signed into law.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know why I didn't have that down there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you. Let's see, and where are we at for
We
time?
were on the House Joint
We've got
Resolution.
about 5 minutes.
Constitutional
Yeah.
amendments. And that would
Yes.
enshrine hunting and fishing, and as during the discussion in committee, trapping, as Representative Baldonado, one of the sponsors, one of those bills, put it. But at any rate, perhaps to some people's dismay or surprise, our organization opposed these constitutional amendments. We very much believe that hunting and fishing and trapping are privileges. And in one of the FIRs in the previous an iteration of one of these, the Attorney General's office did say that that would be make them an absolute right. And that's way beyond what we could do. I think it would have, if they'd been in effect, probably Senate Bill 32 might not have been passable because of the way it went. And although I wasn't, the outcome was not what I would have wished, I really would not want to take away the commission and legislature's authority to regulate hunting, fishing, and trapping. So stop there.
Okay. And then there's also a question I've always had when these come up is, right now you have a due process hearing for your license. Does this create a fundamental right where you're suddenly litigating constitutional claims if you want to suspend or revoke somebody's hunting license or fishing license? And that's always a question I've had.
That was certainly one of our concerns, and particularly, and we like the accountability that the revocation systems bring to law enforcement and wildlife management. And yes, I think it opened the door to that very much, exactly what you're talking about, as a layman's opinion.
And let's see. Oh, this one was, let me move this one now. Back over here. I think we're getting at the end of our time here. So before we end here, I think if you want to, you can take a look at these. You should have the legislation list. All the attendees should have that, and you can link directly to the bills, and you can see what happened with the bills. You can, the rest of this PowerPoint, you've got that. And at this point, what I think I need to do is to really thank all of the panelists. I really appreciate your coming in and putting in the time. And we can't do this without you guys. And so I want to thank you very much. And is there one question up?
Yes, the question is, can we send a link to the recording? The recording will be posted to the law school website. I'm not sure, Guy, do you know where else it's being posted?
Sue?
Yeah, so it'll be on the law school's website, probably sometime next week under CLE programs for self-study. And it'll also be posted, I think, Guy, were we going to post it on the animal law section's website?
Yes. We'll do that. I'll talk to them about that and
okay,
make sure that they are willing to do that.
Great.
But anyway, I thank everyone for attending. It's been really good, and thank you all again, the panelists, for the great discussion of these bills. And we'll see you, I think, in a couple of years if we're all still sticking around here.
Thank you, Guy.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good evening. Enjoy the weekends.
Everybody. Yeah.
Yeah.